Graduate student at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill was charged with first-degree murder after the fatal shooting of a professor in his research department. The murder charges carry a punishment of life sentence without parole. Jeff Neiman, the district attorney of Chatham and Orange counties, said after Tuesday's hearing that he would not seek the death penalty. And in Michigan, the Michigan Republican Party is starving for cash. A group of prominent activists, including a former statewide candidate, was hit this month with felony charges connected to a bizarre plot to hijack elections machines. And in the face of these troubles, suspicion and infighting have been running high. A recent state committee meeting led to a fist fight, if you can believe it, a spinal injury, and a pair of shattered dentures. This turmoil is one measure of the way Donald J. Trump's lies about the 2020 election have rippled through his party. Pressure mounts on Spanish soccer chief over kiss at World Cup. Yeah, Luis Rubiales has defied calls to resign, now echoed by his own federation. Soccer World's governing body has suspended him, and prosecutors have opened an initial investigation. Now down to Georgia, where Georgia school district canceled an author's talk after he said gay. Yeah, an elementary school principal in Forsyth County emailed parents to apologize last week after Mark Tyler Nobleman used the word in a presentation about the origins of Batman. And the Biden administration Tuesday identified 10, count them, 10 expensive prescription drugs it's chosen for price negotiations with pharmaceutical manufacturers as the government seeks to ease the financial burden on older and disabled Americans. Now, the announcement marks an unprecedented step in a long political war over the nation's exorbitant drug costs, even as the pharmaceutical industry is still trying to block the plan. And down to Florida, where Miami Mayor Francis Suarez is ending his long-shot 2024 presidential campaign less than 3 months after he launched it. Suarez, the only Hispanic candidate in the GOP nominating contest, launched his campaign in mid-June, later than most of his now former rivals. Last week, he failed to qualify for the first Republican debate after falling short of the necessary polling requirements. And Mark Meadows struggles to distance himself from Trump's plot. Yeah, one lesson from the proceedings is that Trump's co-defendants are going to struggle to distance themselves from the alleged conspiracy. Meadows repeatedly argued that he was merely doing his duty as a very involved chief of staff who needed to be abreast of what the president was doing. While he participated in many key elements, he often played down his proximity to the effort to overturn the election. And in Tennessee, the Tennessee House Republicans majority voted Monday to temporarily silence a Democratic lawmaker who is a member of the Tennessee Three after he expressed skepticism about the draft bill proposing to install armed police at schools, even if those institutions had not adopted such policies. This is Areva Martin in real time. I'm Dr. Nicordelai Corte, and I'm sitting in today for Areva while she is away. But have no fear. She'll be right on back on Thursday. This is still your one-stop destination for today's trending news, expert analysis, and unfiltered opinions. That's right. You're in the right place. In my first hour, I'm joined by Dr. Carlos Hill, author and professor over at the University of Oklahoma. Also, Dr. Calvin John Smiley, author of Purgatory Citizenship, Reentry, Race, and Abolition. And in our second hour, we go behind the headlines and bring you the stories that are making big headlines and have a big impact. Today, we are tackling gun violence and racially motivated hate in light of the recent attacks on 3 African Americans in a Dollar General store in Jacksonville, Florida. In hour 2, I'll be joined by Nick Wilson, Senior Director for Gun Violence Prevention at the Center for American Progress, and Terrence J. Evans, Director of Region 11 of the National Bar Association. Now, before I bring on my guest, here's what I'm thinking in real time, and I have a feeling that y'all may be thinking the same thing in real time. I just can't help but keep thinking about the victims of the white supremacist shooting at the Dollar General store in Jacksonville, Florida. The white supremacists who shot and killed 3 Black people at the Jacksonville Dollar General store. Their lives are gone forever. And like so many of us, they were simply going about their daily routines. And so I want to lift up the names. I want to say the names of the lives that were taken at that Jacksonville Dollar General store. Anult A.J. Laguerre Jr., 19, started working at the Dollar Tree to make some change in his pocket. Gerald Deshaun Gallen, 29, was a devoted father and co-parent. And Angela Michelle Carr, 52, was an Uber driver dropping off a passenger at the Dollar General store. You know, I know so many of our listeners grow tired and even weary hearing about these examples of gun violence in our country, these examples of white supremacy violence in our country. You better believe, you know, those of us that have the privilege of being on the airwaves every day, we grow tired, we grow weary, you know, of sharing these sorts of reports. But I'm so glad that we have experts to provide some analysis and help us to make sense out of what we might be able to make sense out of in order to make a change. And so when we come forward, I can't wait to hop in the conversation with Dr. Carlos Hill and Dr. Calvin John Smiley. We will be with you every step of the way as we continue to keep our eye on these developments in Jacksonville and then some. You are listening to Areva Martin in real time. More when we come forward. You're listening to KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader.
Are you ready?
The station leading the way with exclusive interviews,
Follow the leader.
stimulating conversation, and intellectual discourse that empowers, enlightens, and informs.
Follow the leader.
Follow the leader at KBLA 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Keep following the leader.
Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Gotta stay fresh, my. House shot with a rest spot. Shot with a rest spot. Shot with a rest spot.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
Bounce is back.
Here comes the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head. Yeah.
This is a rather bold pronouncement, but we think we can back it up. If you come across a radio frequency anywhere putting more variety and more diversity on the air than KBLA Talk 1580, we sure would like to hear about your discovery.
You got to have vision.
You can search, but we are confident that you won't find more shows covering more topics, hosted by a more diverse and inclusive lineup of talkers than the squad we have assembled here at KBLA Talk 1580.
This is the time, brothers. This is the time.
We've got something for everybody.
That's right.
Health and healing, history and humor, issues and events, empowerment and entertainment, all in one station.
What's really going on?
Free enterprise, you dig?
KBLA Talk 1580.
Yes.
Oh yeah. We got a lot to talk about.
King Kong ain't got on me.
listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580. You're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings, 9 a.m. to 12 noon on your unapologetically progressive radio station, KBLA Talk 1580. KBLA Talk 1580.
Is the pen mightier than the sword?
They say the pen is mightier than the sword. At KBLA Talk 1580, we not only have a lot to talk about, we have a lot.
You're listening to Areva Martin in real time on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dr. Cordeline Corte, filling in for Areva. You can typically find me right here on KBLA Talk 1580 every Sunday from 10 a.m. to 12 noon Pacific as your moderator and chief national political analyst for a more perfect union. But today I am right here with you and I'm in good company. I want to welcome to the show two extremely accomplished scholars and practitioners, Dr. Carlos Hill. He is author and professor over at the University of Oklahoma, and Dr. Calvin John Smiley. He's author of Purgatory Citizenship, Reentry, Race, and Abolition. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you for having me.
And so first things first, I would be remiss if we didn't attempt to unpack these recent shootings that have been in the headlines. Of course, the shooting in Jacksonville, Florida, that still has that community reeling and has really Black folks from across the country reeling. In part because it is another reminder of the continued threat of white supremacy violence across the country. What do you all make of the shooting in Jacksonville?
Well, if you mind if I jump in, Calvin?
Absolutely.
I'm going to just say it really quick. Thank you for grounding our conversation and remembering the names of the victims. I think we have to ground the conversation there because that's where ultimately the justice conversation is. But I think in so many cases, when we don't remember the names, it just becomes victims. It becomes detached from people's humanity. So thank you for invoking that. But I would say what this shooting lays bare is, we spent a lot of time reflecting on and even talking about legislation around George Floyd's murder and how we wanted to combat not just police violence, but racist violence, racist attacks on Black people that we were talking about. And what is the fate of that bill? What is the fate of other bills like it? I think this sort of event, or not event, this fatal shooting of 3 Black people, precious Black people, brings that into stark focus that what we haven't done legislatively, and not to speak of culturally, but that's just sort of a basic sort of like, it helps us to understand what we haven't done so far.
I mean, beautifully put, and you're right. This is a reminder of the work that still is yet to be done. And as you were talking about that, I couldn't, help think about not just the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, but also stand your ground laws, that have been really perverted and used as a tool to excuse some of the white supremacist violence that we've seen in different parts of the country. I want to bring Dr. Smiley into this conversation. And I want you to help us sort of connect the dots because I don't think what happened in Jacksonville is completely disconnected from, what we reported on at the top of the show in North Carolina, where, we've seen, a university professor was killed. I'm going to be heading into the classroom next week at Pepperdine to begin teaching this semester. And my heart goes out to the family of that university professor at UNC Chapel Hill. But it's just another example, of the gun violence and all of the places and spaces it manifests. I mean, you can't even go to a Dollar General store in Jacksonville. You can't go into, a classroom, a lecture hall, a lab in North Carolina, right? Have we resigned ourselves to just accepting that, it's the Wild Wild West everywhere, and this is just, how we live in the United States?
Well, this is surely, part of American culture. Gun violence is, not a one-off isolated incident, but as you said, there is a thread, a theme, a common denominator about how many guns are available and accessible to folks. I mean, going back to Jacksonville, the police even said there was no red flags. There would have been no way for the police or other kind of stop gates from stopping this young man, this 21-year-old white supremacist, from buying those guns. So, that's why there are those who say we have to have even more gun laws or common sense gun laws. But even with those kind of common sense gun laws, the fact that people have gun availability so freely puts us all at a threat. And going back to the UNC, I have a very close friend and colleague who actually works at the university, and the professor who was killed was someone who came in with their cohort. And so, the last 24 hours, I know that they've been, very much traumatized, as I'm sure everyone on that campus has been, and to be killed by a graduate student. So, someone that this professor, I'm sure, had a relationship with, we know, but what that relationship was, I guess we'll find out. But we all have to kind of be on kind of high alert at all times, which I think also just adds to the paranoia and the anxiety that we all might feel that, anytime you go to a public place, that this can kind of happen. But, I also think about the Black woman who was shot by her white neighbor that Areva had talked about a month ago. The white neighbor had an issue with her Black neighbor, and she went and shot her. And the police didn't even, talk about stand your ground. That white woman, I don't believe, was actually even charged with anything when that dust settled. So we continue to see this propensity for violence, but there is no real accountability in the United States for it. It's often seen when it's white folks as an isolated incident. When it's Black folks, it's pathological. And therefore, we have these kind of rules that kind of monitor and surveil one population, but another population seems to have free reign with whatever they want to do when it comes to violence.
And speaking of folks having free reign and basically doing what they want to do, the Michigan Republican Party, I reported earlier, is starving for cash. A group of prominent activists, including former statewide candidates, were hit this month with felony charges connected to a bizarre plot to hijack election machines. And so here we go again. I mean, right now we know that the 2020 election is still being litigated in the courts. The former president, Donald Trump, has received a number of indictments. I think we're up to 4, a number of which were connected to funny business around the 2020 election. We haven't even gotten into the January 6th. We're just talking about 2020 election, activities. And here we go. The Michigan Republican Party, is under the microscope related to the same issue. And so, is it possible that Republicans might see the light before the 2024 election? Are we a bit more confident than we might have been before? Is there a reason for some cautious optimism, that we're starting to hear calls for more accountability, from leaders, I put it in quotations, in the Republican Party? Certainly at the GOP debate, we heard, the voices of former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson and former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, sort of calling out Trump in no uncertain terms and saying that they, wouldn't support him if he became the nominee, while everybody else on the stage seemed to raise their hand in support. What's the state of accountability in the Republican Party of today? Are they inching towards a return to reality? Dr. Hill?
I love the way you framed it, Dr. Cordelai. Cautious, did you say cautious optimism?
Yes, sir.
I would emphasize cautious. What I fear, I'll first talk about what I fear is the ways in which the Trump campaign sought to use hijacking an election as a strategy is what is seemingly the Republican Party is engaging in as well. Or at least, it seems like a really terrible plot, but nonetheless, that is what is the state, right? If we just take it at its face value, these are the kinds of things a major Republican Party is doing, right? Not some small, the Michigan Republican Party. So if we just take that seriously, what is happening, there's been a really just a pernicious example set by Trump that you can actually, if you can't change the election, you can create so much dust and so much confusion that maybe you can pull off a victory in that kind of confusion. He's created that as a possibility. And so that is the worrying trend. But, with having voices like Chris Christie speak out and others, that's good. But I don't think it's enough. We haven't heard from the most important voices in the party. We haven't heard from people who can really talk about starve the Republican Party for cash, starve the Trump campaign for cash, and the people who support it, by, saying that no to everything that he represents. That's what would be, to me, a bigger sign. But I know we're far from that.
Will there be a price to pay if some of the so-called Republican leaders of the party, especially those who are running for president, will there be a price to pay if they speak up too soon with regard to what's happening in Michigan? We know that is a key state that a number of them would enjoy support from. How likely is it that we might hear any of the GOP hopefuls, speak up and try and actually be a party leader and be a uniter and bring Republicans together, starting in the state of Michigan?
I would say this. Yeah, I would say this. They might, but the reality is that the GOP faces Donald Trump. And so unless Donald Trump comes out and says something that would be uniting and not divisive, and talking about rigged elections and how 2020 and January 6th was more, simply a nice day, in Washington, I don't see it happening. And, I see, if we think back to 2016, the GOP took a gamble. They said, okay, there's this reality star who's saying some wild stuff. He's leading our party, and they went with it, right? They abandoned ship with the more traditional, quote unquote, conservatives when people like Jeb Bush and others were not hitting their mark. They allowed this kind of sideshow to move from the margins to the center. And so the things that we typically saw as kind of the fringe parts of the Republican Party are now the mainstream. And so there might be a fracture at some point, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not in 2024, but there certainly could be a fracture between what we would see as more traditional conservatives versus kind of Trumpists, and how that might play out. Because even the kind of Asa Hutchinson, and Chris Christie kind of raising their hand, or not raising their hands, is not a sign that they are some kind of markers of progressive conservatism. They are really conservative people who have some really conservative values that will really hurt marginalized groups and other groups that have been historically impacted by the GOP. So I want to make it clear to the listeners that, you know, the Chris Christies are not going to be saviors either. They're just going to do it the more traditional way, with the smile versus the kind of visceral, nasty language that Donald Trump has used, but unfortunately has worked for him. And so I think we have to think as a country, how do we strategize against that and kind of take that power away?
I mean, beautifully said. You know, I refer to them as so-called leaders in part because they're still Trumpy. They're still peddling in Trumpism, right? They still largely support the same policies that Donald Trump supports. And I think, you know, one of the folks that does it very well is Senator Tim Scott, you know, who's Trumpy with a smile. And so it's still, you know, yet to be known, you know, how far that gets you, being Trumpy, but with a smile. When we come forward, we're going to be unpacking more of the day's headlines. I am so delighted to have these two bright scholar practitioners with us today, Dr. Carlos Hill, author and professor over at the University of Oklahoma, and Dr. Calvin John Smiley, author of Purgatory Citizenship, Reentry, Race, and Abolition. You're listening to Areva Martin in real time on KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader.
Are you ready?
The station leading the way with exclusive interviews,
Follow the leader.
stimulating conversation, and intellectual discourse that empowers, enlightens, and informs.
Follow the leader.
Follow the leader at KBLA 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Keep following the leader. Follow 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 the leader.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a rest bar, shot with a rest bar, shot with a rest bar.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
The bounce is back.
Here comes the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head. Yeah.
This is a rather bold pronouncement, but we think we can back it up. If you come across a radio frequency anywhere putting more variety and more diversity on the air than KBLA Talk 1580, we sure would like to hear about your discovery.
You got to have vision.
You can search. We are confident that you won't find more shows covering more topics, hosted by a more diverse and inclusive lineup of talkers than the squad we have assembled here at KBLA Talk 1580.
This is the time, brothers. This is the time.
We've got something for everybody.
That's right.
Health and healing, history and humor, issues and events, empowerment and entertainment, all in one station.
What's really going on?
Free enterprise, you dig?
KBLA Talk 1580.
Yes.
Oh yeah. We got a lot to talk about.
King Kong ain't got on me.
If you're not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings, 9 a.m. to 12 noon on your unapologetically progressive radio station, KBLA Talk 1580. KBLA Talk 1580.
Is the pen mightier than the sword?
They say the pen is mightier than the sword. At KBLA Talk 1580, we not only have a lot to talk about, we have a lot to write about. Politics, relationships, business, empowerment, and culture. The all-star roster at KBLA Talk 1580 has you covered.
That's what it's all about.
Be sure to follow us on all our socials for our latest book releases, op-eds, essays, and commentaries from our hosts. And, of course, download the KBLA 1580 app as we strive to remain your most trusted, credible, and reliable source for the issues you care about. This is unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
What up, baby?
I'm young, gifted, and black.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we do more than just talk.
Hey there, I'm Jared Hill, president of the National Association of Black Journalists of Los Angeles, and I just want to say thank you for the benevolent $10,000 donation and scholarships for the next generation of black journalists.
And I'm Haywood Galbraith, photojournalist and founder of the Minority Photojournalism Institute. Thanks, KBLA, for your generous $10,000 scholarship gift to help us train the next generation of black photojournalists.
Congratulations to all the students who will benefit from the scholarship dollars raised at our Black History Month luncheon, honoring black legends in LA media. When we come forward at KBLA Talk 1580, we're bringing everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us.
Access granted.
In a survey conducted by the public opinion research firm Eviderus, KBLA Talk 1580 consistently emerged as the station of choice for black audiences in the Los Angeles media market and beyond. The survey also revealed that the vast majority of black audiences are concerned about the lack of black-owned media and are more likely to listen to talk radio that focuses on issues that impact the black community. For some reason, the other talk stations haven't quite figured that out.
If you think about KFI, well, KFI only has like a 3% black listenership. 3%. So there's a good 97% out there to support a station like KBLA.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black. Your black. Your black.
Follow the leader.
KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader.
Are you ready?
The station leading the way with exclusive interviews,
Follow the leader.
stimulating conversation, and intellectual discourse that empowers, enlightens, and informs.
Follow the leader.
Follow the leader at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Keep following the leader.
Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
You're listening to Areva Martin in real time on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dr. Nicolai Corte in good company with a pair of doctors. I'm joined with two really extraordinary scholars and practitioners. Dr. Carlos Hill, he's author and professor over at the University of Oklahoma, and Dr. Calvin John Smiley, he's author of Purgatory Citizenship, Reentry, Race, and Abolition. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. We've been having a good conversation talking about Republicans maybe attempting to get it together in Michigan. That's maybe all in caps. But moving on from Michigan to Georgia, where at the top of the show, I had shared that the Georgia School District had canceled an author's talk after he said gay. An elementary school principal in Forsyth County emailed parents to apologize last week after Mark Tyler Nobleman used the word in a presentation about the origins of Batman. Now, we knew that this was going to happen when the Republicans in the legislature, started trying to mimic what they saw in Florida's legislature. Advancing this Don't Say Gay bill. And it is creating an atmosphere, an environment across the country, not just in Georgia, where teachers, are feeling a little anxiety, about really diving into their course content, let alone, engaging in critical thinking and critical conversations in class. And I know, the pedagogy that you practice in your classroom, Dr. Smiley, encourages conversation. it encourages folks to interrogate, the world around them by asking the question, why? And so, talk to us as an educator, how you respond to headlines like this in the news.
It's shameful. The reality is that the party of freedom, as the Republicans like to call themselves, are really a party of hostility, hatred, and limiting folks' freedom. The fact that you can't say certain words really edges on fascism. And as we are seeing around the country, there's this kind of growing, or rather not growing, but kind of more overtly anti-gay sentiment that is only being fueled by these dog whistles, by saying you can't say gay or passing legislation. And as we see those types of legislative bills and other kind of things tend to show up in death and violence, as we've seen recently, the store owner in California who was shot and killed in her store because she had a pride flag. And now all of a sudden conservatives are feigning ignorance, like, well, that's not because of us. Well, you can't be out here saying every day how it's bad to talk about these things, or you cannot talk about these things, or these things are bad or anti-American. And then when someone goes out and practices what you're preaching, you say that's not my fault. And so in a classroom, as you said it perfectly, we have to interrogate why. And so in this instance, I would be asking my students to really think about, why is there this anti-gay sentiment? What does this threaten, and who does it threaten? Who's perceived to be threatened by this? And the kind of calls to say that a fifth grader can't hear the word gay, or a second grader, whatever age they were, is just ridiculous.
And Dr. Hill, I'm going to ask you, help us unpack, what makes these gay or LGBTQ, wedge issue so potent. I mean, as long as I've certainly been alive, and I'll be 40 years old next year, LGBTQ folks, queer folks, have been used as a political bludgeon in this country. People have been able to target the community and successfully win elections. It's no different when it comes to the dog whistles that we've heard historically around Black people. And if you happen to be both Black and LGBTQ, fasten your seatbelt. And so, help us unpack for our listeners who may not have an immersion in community, what seems to make, these sorts of, bills and this legislation and this rhetoric and this, anti, gay hate. What makes it so potent still in 2023?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I don't know, but what I will say is this: much like race, right? The issue, LGBTQIA issues, are reliably polarizing. You can reliably polarize people around issues of race, whether it's affirmative action, and certainly in this modern era, you can certainly polarize people around gay marriage. You can polarize them around so many issues that touch upon religiosity or touch on people's cultural, social values, that they are reliably polarizing. And so much like the Southern strategy, there are ways now that strategists, I think, sit around and say, if you really want to turn the election, use this as a wedge issue. We can rely on people responding, getting angry, getting mad. And so I think that's where we are with so much of the politics around wokeism. Like, this is a place where reliably you can get people angry around what liberals are teaching our children, right? These are reliably conservative issues that in this day and age, in the age of Trump, they've been able to turn into a true wedge issue in ways that they had talked about, but never been able to really make into a wedge issue. Now it's a deciding issue for so many. And what I would really say, just to end this, is what is really at stake is the idea that we can even have a conversation about these things in ways that are not polarizing. I think they want to polarize, make these conversations so polarizing that we don't even want to talk about them. We just want to argue about them. And so I think what's at stake in our classrooms is not just having a conversation about it, but having a healing conversation about it, the very thing that they say that we can't have around issues of race or issues of sexuality. We can't talk about them in ways that help a community understand and be better in relationship with. That's what I think is at stake.
And building off of what Dr. Hill just shared, Dr. Smiley, can you put a finer point on it and help our leaders, learners, and listeners sort of begin to rethink or reimagine what can we do with our agency in an era where there are some folks that they want to prevent us from even having a conversation, let alone, reaching a level of understanding. They just don't even want to have the conversation. And so our folks that are listening, how can we tap into our agency? How can we, be a part of co-creating a climate that is counter to the kind of climate that we're seeing, in places like Florida and Georgia and Michigan and other places?
Well, I think for so many of us, especially living in the 21st century technologically advanced world, we get very cynical when things don't happen immediately. And I think when we think about ideologies, is that there has to be a lot of effort and work put into it. So that means joining a book club, volunteering with an organization, taking some classes, listening. I think that's also a big thing. So many people don't listen to other folks. They hear one thing or one soundbite, one clickbait, and they run with that. And then it's about getting out there, doing the work. And that means volunteering, voting, mutual aid, and doing other type of participatory action projects that really can strengthen grassroots movements so that we aren't putting folks into positions of power and leadership who are going to then create legislation and policy that are going to impact our lives in a negative way. We want to make sure that we have elected officials, other stakeholders, and community leaders that are going to be a larger voice for us, and so that we don't see this sort of reactionary policy put into play. And that might take time.
Yeah, it might take time, but I think we're up for it. We're up for the challenge. And adding to your list of volunteering and voting and mutual aid, I would add a little bit of wisdom that you reminded me of from my grandmother. She said, pray with your hands and pray with your feet. More with Dr. Smiley and Dr. Hill. You're listening to Areva Martin in real time on KBLA Talk 1580.
If you're not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings, 9 a.m. to 12 noon on your unapologetically progressive radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580. Is the pen mightier than the sword?
They say the pen is mightier than the sword. At KBLA Talk 1580, we not only have a lot to talk about, we have a lot to write about. Politics, relationships, business, empowerment, and culture. The all-star roster at KBLA Talk 1580 has you covered.
That's what it's all about.
Be sure to follow us on all our socials for our latest book releases, op-eds, essays, and commentaries from our hosts. And, of course, download the KBLA 1580 app as we strive to remain your most trusted, credible, and reliable source for the issues you care about. This is unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
What up, baby?
than black. At KBLA Talk 1580, we do more than just talk.
Hey there, I'm Jared Hill, president of the National Association of Black Journalists of Los Angeles, and I just want to say thank you for the benevolent $10,000 donation and scholarships for the next generation of black journalists.
And I'm Haywood Galbraith, photojournalist and founder of the Minority Photojournalism Institute. Thanks, KBLA, for your generous $10,000 scholarship gift to help us train the next generation of black photojournalists.
Congratulations to all the students who will benefit from the scholarship dollars raised at our Black History Month luncheon, honoring black legends in LA media. When we come forward at KBLA Talk 1580, we're bringing everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us.
Connection established. Access granted.
In a survey conducted by the public.
You're listening to Areva Martin in real time. Yeah, you got it right. I'm not Areva Martin. I'm Nicordelai Corte. I'm filling in for Areva Martin, who will be right back here on Thursday. But have no fear. I'm not alone. I'm joined by two extraordinary gentlemen, Dr. Carlos Hill, who's an author and professor of the University of Oklahoma, and Dr. Calvin John Smiley. No relation to Tavis Smiley, at least no direct relationship to Tavis Smiley, but another cool brother nonetheless, author of Purgatory Citizenship, Reentry, Race, and Abolition. Gentlemen, before the break, near the top of the show, I had a chance to talk about a major victory for older adults across the country. The Biden administration on Tuesday, they identified 10 expensive prescription drugs that they've chosen for price negotiation with pharmaceutical manufacturers as the government seeks to ease the financial burden on older and disabled Americans. Now, the announcement marks an unprecedented, all caps, unprecedented step in a long political war over the nation's exorbitant drug costs, even as pharmaceutical industry is still trying to block the plan. This is what I think President Biden would call a BFD. If y'all remember when they passed the Affordable Care Act, so famously whispered to President Obama at the time, the BFD. Well, this is a BFD. Dr. Hill, talk to us about what impact you think this might have, certainly in your state, and how much of a victory is this for a lot of our listeners? People that would benefit enormously from having cheaper prescription drugs like insulin, for example, among others?
I mean, I love the start of the show when you use cautious optimism. This is a really good sign. 10 drugs that have been identified for price gouging or for just being exorbitantly priced, fighting on behalf of the American consumer, really, really good. But as you know, what's frightening about this country at times is that we can have these real seemingly unprecedented BFDs. And then shortly after that, those progressive measures, like with, what has been called for many years Obamacare, that was a BFD, slowly chipped away at, tried to make it inoperable at throughout the Trump administration. So I'm optimistic, but at the same time worrisome that how long will this kind of thing hold? And so it's kind of a wait and see, like what happens. Are they able to successfully negotiate lower prices and actually see real relief, or will it fall short as some of the efforts, well fought efforts, have in the past? So, but I think cautious optimism is good here.
Dr. Smiley, is this victory for older adults and disabled Americans, is this victory sort of right on time? And we know that Americans sort of, have short memories when it comes to progress. And we're under, no delusions. We know that this 2024 election cycle is going to be tough. I think there are a lot of folks that are going to be asking, what have you done for us lately? This is a pretty big thing to have a pretty big victory to have at the top of people's minds as they are preparing to head into the primary season early next year. What difference do you think, this victory will have on the 2024 election cycle for Democrats? And also, what difference do you think it might have among Republicans, who, really fought against this? This is a clear Democratic win. We would not be talking about prescription drug reform, if Democrats didn't really rally to try and take this thing over the finish line.
Absolutely. And I agree with Dr. Hill with the cautious optimism that, when you brought this up at the top of the hour, the first thing that went through my head is I really hope this isn't just political theater that then goes to the wayside after the election cycle, or where do the negotiations happen where, okay, these 10 drugs have lower price points, but then 10 other drugs, the price point goes higher and it kind of evens out. So I'm really cautiously optimistic about that. But to your direct question about how this will impact disabled and or elder folks in our country, absolutely, tremendously. We know that drugs, pharmaceutical drugs, and other kind of life-saving medicines are what we need. And we know because of the global pandemic that we have both the infrastructure and the capacity to roll things like this out. We were able to roll out a COVID-19 vaccination and give it to everyone, regardless of one's legal status or residency in this country, and so on and so forth. So we know that the capacity is there. We just have to make sure to continue to put the will, or keep the pressure on that the will is there. For the Democrats, I hope that they hold this up as a huge, huge monumental victory, to continue to show Americans this is the party that is at least trying to help the American people. The Republicans are going to continue to try to use fear-mongering, as they did with the Affordable Care Act. To convince people that healthcare is bad for them is a pretty sadistic thing. I don't know what else to say about it. And, there's something about pharmaceutical companies that use public funds, taxpayer dollars, to create drugs, and then somehow they get to keep the profits. I'm constantly mind-boggled by that. How do you use public monies and then keep the profits as a private entity and say, well, this is for us and not the people? So I think that these first 10 drugs is the first step in a long fight to kind of undo some of the ways in which the pharmaceutical companies and empires, shall I say, have democracy and a vice. Mm-hmm. And I think that we need to do the right thing and continue to put pressure on legislation and our public officials to undo that.
Speaking of democracy and a vice, the Tennessee House Republicans majority voted on Monday to temporarily silence a Democratic lawmaker who is a member of the Tennessee 3 after he expressed skepticism about a draft bill proposed to install armed police at schools, even if those institutions had not adopted such a policy. I've been in touch with sources on the ground in Tennessee, who had shared with me a video before it had gone viral of the Tennessee State House Speaker, Speaker Sexton, seemingly pushing Justin Pearson on the floor of the Tennessee State House, amid protest in the chamber, things seemingly, getting a little nasty. And this is all about gun safety. You might remember that the Republican governor of Tennessee called a special session for folks to consider a very, narrow package of gun safety legislation. And, it looked like the Senate, was ready to move on something, but the Tennessee State House would not allow anything meaningful to go through. And so, that legislative session is now over. They won't be back in session until January. But to your point earlier about the contrast between what Democrats seem to be fighting for, the by the way, polls well with most Americans, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, versus the position of Republicans who are largely against these things, like gun safety legislation, meaningful gun safety legislation. Will this stick? In our final moments, Dr. Smiley and Dr. Hill, and Dr. Hill, please start. Will any of this stick, or will we see American voters catch a case of amnesia and potentially vote outside their interest?
Well, when you say American voters voting outside their interest, I really think that just going back to healthcare, I don't think Americans are opposed to healthcare. I think they're opposed to healthcare for all. And, because that would mean giving up some of the racist narratives that have been perpetuated within the Republican Party about, whether it's Black people, whether it's, immigrants, what have you, giving up certain narratives about unworthiness, laziness, et cetera, that have been used as political wedge issues to divide and to conquer. And so I think that so much of this is about really ultimately who the party ultimately wants to be in relationship to these issues, these defining issues like healthcare, which when you have a country like the United States, one of that has it's the wealthiest Western economy, but also the unhealthiest, right? How could we have healthy politics if we are unhealthy as a nation? Those things don't go together, right? And so we have deep problems that related to our healthcare that we are refusing to address that are affecting our politics. So I think that's what we need to be looking at.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. My thanks to Dr. Carlos Hill, author and professor of the University of Oklahoma, and also Dr. Calvin John Smiley, author of Purgatory Citizenship, Reentry, Race, and Abolition. My thanks to you, my dear scholars. Please come back again soon. And we have more for you in our second hour right here on Areva Martin in Real Time. You're listening to KBLA Talk 1580. More when we come forward.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head.
This is a rather bold pronouncement, but we think we can back it up. If you come across a radio frequency anywhere putting more variety and more diversity on the air than KBLA Talk 1580, we sure would like to hear about your discovery.
You got to have vision.
You can search, but we are confident that you won't find more shows covering more topics, hosted by a more diverse and inclusive lineup of talkers than the squad we have assembled here at KBLA Talk 1580.